Kat is an amazing author and a very inspiring leader and conversationalist around the topic of friendship, which is something that I think we're all interested in. And it's been especially interesting this past year, and we'll talk about it too. But she wrote the book, We Should Get Together, The Secret to Cultivating Better Friendships. And when I first found this book and found Kat, I was just enamored with the conversation that she was having on this topic, because I do think friendship and making friends in the adult years is different. And she'll talk about that tonight and why that is. And in addition, I had the pleasure of taking a workshop with Kat. And for those of you who don't follow her, we'll make sure to follow up with the links, but she offers fantastic workshops where she shares her hard-earned knowledge just very generously with others who are either aspiring writers or designers or creators. And so I encourage you to not only learn what she has to share here tonight, but to check out the many talents she has and gifts she offers. So Kat, welcome. You're in the Bay Area tonight.
Yes, thank you for having me, Monica. Hello from the Bay Area. Still sunny, still shining.
And I love that you have on your bright spring colors and yay, and your big smile for us. I think we're gonna have a juicy conversation tonight about friendship, and no questions off limits. One of the things I want to invite the audience to do is to write your questions in the chat, as well as Kat is sharing, if there's special things that resonate or comments or ahas that you have, please include that as well. While the event is being recorded, the chat is not recorded. So you can feel like that's a great place for you to be in conversation with us and not be part of the recording that's published. Okay. Anything else before we get started tonight, Kat?
No, I'm ready to dive in. I'm been pumped for tonight, and I'm looking forward to a really great conversation together with you and all the folks in the chat too.
Okay, good. Well, I could have asked you 50 questions about this book. There are so many great nuggets. And one of the things I really like too is how well organized it is, and all your illustrations. There are just a lot of really fun illustrations. You make it really visually easy to follow, and the flow is great. And I learned about friendship, and I also learned about you. And one of the things that surprised me is that you consider yourself an introvert, yet here you were seeking friends. Tell me about that.
Yes, great question. This one is something that people are sometimes surprised by. They're like, what do you mean you're an introvert? And I think that's because maybe there's some misconceptions out there about introverts. Like people think, oh, like introverts don't need people. They're fine just alone forever. That's like not true. So there's two parts of it for me. Like introversion comes in a lot of different flavors. And for me, what that means is like, I'm really comfortable with solitude. I really love my own company, and I actually need a lot of alone time to feel balanced and to recharge my batteries. However, because I'm an introvert, being social, like doing social activities and things like that, really is draining for me. So extroverts get a lot of energy when they're around people. I lose a lot of energy when I'm around people. And because I'm going to lose that energy anyways, I want my social interactions to be really, really high quality. I want them to be good because I'm going to be tired afterwards anyhow. And with that, I also care a whole lot about connection. And I think, again, this isn't something that's specific to introverts or extroverts, but I think having meaningful, like juicy, genuine, authentic relationships is super duper important. And we actually all need this to survive and to thrive as living beings. And as an introvert, I think that it's even more important to me to have really healthy relationships and to have like connections that feel like really resonant and vibrant, because I'm going to, like I said, expend that energy anyway. And I want that to be for something really good. It's kind of like the difference between eating like a really healthy, like delicious salad with all kinds of like fruits and nuts in it versus like a bag of like chips. Like I love chips. Trust me, I do, but you can't live on that. You need more nutrition. And so the connection piece is about getting really nutritious connections.
That's a really helpful visual, and easier said than done, right? I mean,
yeah.
Right. I know you wrote a whole book about it, so it's hard to distill it in one sentence, right? But tell us a little bit about why it's so hard.
Gosh, there are so many challenges to adult friendship. And one of the things, so my background about like why I did this and why I was interested is because like I'm a researcher and a designer. So I care a lot about experiences that people have. And I'm also extremely curious. So when I encountered the problem in my mid-30s of like having a hard time making friends, being new in a new town, meeting cool people all the time, but then having a hard time either with lots of people moving away, and then I would like lose those friendships, or they just wouldn't develop to the depth that I really wanted. I was like, what's going on with this? Why is this hard for me? And as a facilitator as well, one of my compulsions is to like try to start a group or like do an event or do something to help solve a problem. And so when I started meeting lots of people who were coming to a gathering I was doing called Better Than Small Talk, so many people, like hundreds of people who would RSVP, would say that they had trouble making friends. And of course, I met them and they were lovely people. I was like, there's no reason why any of these folks should have trouble making friends. And so I got really curious about that. And so that's part also of like why I dig into this topic and why I care about it, is because I care a lot about solving problems and I get really curious when I encounter an unusual one. And this was. And there's so many reasons, right? So like, as I mentioned, people move away. That's one of the biggest number one reasons why people have a hard time establishing and maintaining friendships over time. Also, busyness is a big one. Prior to the pandemic, particularly here in the Bay Area and big urban areas, have a lot of commute time and like long distance driving and things like that. And with work, especially before this like revolution of remote work, so much of our time was spent commuting. I used to commute 10 hours a week. Actually 20 hours a week. It was an hour each way. Yeah. So anyways, now I'm trying to do math. But anyways, there were so many demands on our time, from commute time to moving away to family, like raising kids, like being in a relationship. All of these things are kind of circumstantial, tangential things that get in the way. And then there's also the challenge of establishing intimacy, which for some folks gets more difficult. For some reason, as they get older, it's harder to get as close or as deep as they want to go in friendship.
That is really, really helpful. And while some of it might seem basic, I think one of the things your book really does is it explores each of those topics in depth. And you really spent some time, I think several years, really doing the
Yes.
research, interviewing people, asking a lot of questions. And so here you are, you get your final product. I mean, publishing a book is not easy, and it launches January of 2020. And you have all these action steps of things to do for friendship that, gosh, are no longer quite the same right before the pandemic. Tell me about that journey and kind of what some of your ahas have been since that time.
Yes. So one of the things that I talk about in the book is that one of my best friends and I, we have lived in separate states for like 90% of our friendship. So even though one of the things that I'm a huge, huge proponent of is proximity in the cultivation of friendship, and I talk about that a lot in the book, I also talk about the fact that you don't necessarily have to live right next door to your best friend. And most people don't live next door to their best friend. And so with the challenges of social distance, with the challenges of physical distance and geographical distance, it does not mean that you cannot be friends with someone if just because they move away. In that case, the commitment that people make to the friendship is actually what's most important. Sometimes that commitment evaporates when the convenience of proximity has evaporated. And that's what happens to a lot of people when they move or their friends move. So with that being said, one of the things that did happen, so the book came out January, we're all going to get together, everything was going to be great. And people were like, oh my gosh, we can't meet up face to face. What do we do? Had a lot of questions coming in about that. And so that's why I released the addendum that I put out in April, which is Connected from Afar. This is a really quick, fast read. It's not like the other one with like years of research and all that kind of stuff in it. It's literally 25 weeks of activities that you can do together with a friend from a distance to actually deepen your friendship and get to explore connection in ways that are not just small talk, not just always talking about the news and coronavirus and stuff. So really, really fun to dig into, make art together, do journal, like have different kind of conversations, like really let yourself explore connection in a different way. And it does not matter how far away somebody is to do that.
I appreciate that. And I like the adaptability. And I agree with what you said, is friendship isn't always just about proximity. One of the things you also do is define different types of friendship. And again, while I'm not going to ask you to get into all of those definitions, there was one I really thought was interesting, and that was your concept around hydroponic friendship. Can you elaborate on that for me?
Yes. So Hydroponic friendship. Sometimes people hear that. They're like, what do you mean hydroponic? So I am a plant person. Any plant moms, any plant dads in the chat? Tell me who's out here who loves plants. Any master gardeners? I got my master gardener certification in Seattle, by the way.
Oh, wow.
So I love plants. And because a lot of my time is spent thinking about plants or like reading about plants, a lot of what I think is in plant metaphors and nature metaphors. And hydroponic friendship is absolutely this concept that I came up with because it's in response to one of the biggest challenges people have is feeling like they don't have time to connect. One of the most interesting pieces of research that I came upon in my work on We Should Get Together is that there's a professor and researcher in the University of Kansas, and he found that in order to go from a total stranger to a best friend would take anywhere from 90 to 200 hours. And the folks that he was, of course, studying, like a lot of college professors and researchers, were college students who typically do come in at the beginning of their freshman year, don't know anybody, and then suddenly they've made a best friend. And it would take about 90 to 200 hours to do that. Of course, for a working adult who is not living in a dorm where you're working, sleeping, eating, going to class with the same people 24 hours a day, it's a lot harder to get that much time. And one of the things that I have seen as a facilitator of group spaces and events and retreats and camps and workshops over the last 15 years is that it doesn't actually take that long if what happens when people are together is they have a really, really genuine connection that includes vulnerability, a little bit of risk taking, a little bit of like stepping outside your comfort zone and really being open to the experience of connection. And so because I have seen this happen in less time over the years, I fully believe that we can actually form a deeper bond in a little less than 200 hours if the people who are willing to get together and do that are, again, mutually committed to having really strong, connected, vulnerable, and a little bit of safe risk-taking around what connection could look like there. And so the hydroponic part has to do with plants being grown without soil. People thought that was crazy. And then the guy who proved it was like, okay, I'm the guy of hydroponics. So kind of the same thing. You can do the same thing with a friendship.
I love that. That mutual alignment and intention, right, is so important, and is always communication. So, so we've probably all been in those friendships where it doesn't feel like there's mutual alignment, or it's more of a one-way street. Sometimes even ghosting happens, or you talk, you have some examples about, kind of the people who text last minute, sorry, I'm not going to be there after all the commitments, right? What do you do when you're on the other side of that, when you're just feeling like, wow, I thought we were on the same path and maybe we're not? Any advice?
That is real. So for anyone who's gone through that, I will say you are not alone. It is okay to be frustrated about that. It is something we've all experienced, myself included. And it can be a real bummer, when you feel like you're making this commitment to somebody else and they're not showing up. And so what I would say in that kind of situation is like, is this a pattern or is it a one-off? Like if somebody lets you down one time, are you going to like divorce your friend because they messed up one time? Not a good idea. You should probably have a little more tolerance than that, unless it's like super, super bad. But if it's just like a pattern where like they're constantly not showing up, constantly not offering reciprocity, I think that's a real good catalyst for reflection around, is this a relationship that you want to continue to invest in? It's kind of like dating. If one person's just looking to like hook up for a couple of weeks and someone else is trying to find their life partner, it's not going to work because they don't actually want the same thing. So in friendship, I think that's kind of the same thing. Some people are social butterflies. It's okay if they talk like once every 6 months to someone and just chit chat about whatever. And other people are really looking for that deep heart connection, and they really want to make chosen family out of their friends. And so it's important to kind of check in. And I know some people say, oh, it can seem weird to talk about commitment with friendship. And it's like, how's it working without that conversation? It's probably frustrating and pretty confusing. So I think it's okay to say, to someone like, I really love connecting with you. I love the conversations we have when we spend time together. I literally want to have you in my life until I'm old and gray. I want to know how you feel. I don't want to like be pushy if you like don't have time for that, but I just really, really want to have you in my life. What does it feel like to you? What would feel good to you? And that way, it's not so much about making a demand on the other person, but it's really leading with gratitude and making this really warm invitation for connection.
That is such a beautiful and warm invitation. And I think if I was on the receiving end of that, it would feel great. I do love that you give practical tips throughout your book based on some of the insights you've gained and learned. Um, Help me understand kind of your motivation behind that, and what you think that having those action steps offer, and even if you've heard examples from your readers on what those action steps have given them.
So one thing to know about me is that I am an action-oriented person. Um, I love to read about really amazing concepts and theories and research, but for me, it's all in the application. It's like, how do we make this real? How do we take this learning and actually do something with it so we can better our lives? And so that's just a part of my personality, and it's a huge part of why the book is written the way it is. And as a user experience designer, that was also what my professional job was, right? It's like researching the pain points people have, figuring out and designing a better solution, and then testing that solution to see, does it work? Does it actually produce the outcome that we are going for? And so that's why the book is that way, is because I want to give people not just a bunch of ideas of okay, this research says, if you spend 90 hours together in the first 3 months, you'll bond. But then you're like, well, how do I do that? And it's here's a whole bunch of ways that you can do that, actually. A bunch of really accessible ideas and invitations that you can make that will help foster that kind of connection. So I'm all about making it practical, making it actionable. My love language is acts of service, not a surprise. I'm going for action here.
That's great. And we are getting some great comments in the chat, and I just want to highlight maybe a few just so you can see what people are saying. And also just remember to invite people to pose their questions so we can make sure to incorporate that, and we'll also allow some time. You've got some plant lovers here. Definitely people are wondering about that feeling of how you build trust, or all of a sudden you're at a retreat and you have a great bond with somebody, and then you leave and the event or retreat or whatever it is, and it's dark, right? And building trust. And a lot of somebody just gave an example living in a small college town where there's a lot of transition. So I think just relating to a lot of the things that you've said. Any other comments on any of those topics before I keep going here?
Yeah. So I want to make one comment on the trust question, or comment around that. There's another author whose work I really respect. She also writes about friendship, and she has a book where she talks a lot about trust. Her name's Andrea Beaunoir, and she has a quote I really love that says, "Trust is built when someone has the opportunity to let you down and they don't." And in order to give them the chance to build that trust, you got to give them an opportunity. You got to give them those chances. I saw someone else here put in the chat that they give somebody 3 strikes and you're out, and that's how they put themselves first. And I think it's good to have boundaries and to have an idea of what works for you, to make sure that you're not turn into a doormat, but you're also being flexible and forgiving with people too, because none of us is perfect.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And will you say the name of that book again?
The author is Andrea Beaunoir. I can't remember the exact title of the book.
We'll look it up and add it to the chat. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the questions I loved in your book was when you were asking research questions, you had good ones. And you asked, if you were in debilitating pain in the middle of the night, who would you call? Well, tell me, were you surprised by some of the answers?
I was. And this really, I have had the experience before of being in debilitating pain. And I called my girlfriend at the time, and I ended up staying up all night and then drove myself to the hospital in the morning and found out I had appendicitis. But when we think about being in pain, being in need, being in a really vulnerable position, whether it's a time where we need someone to come to us to help us, in that case, maybe get to the hospital or get some help, or on the flip side of that, when I was in the hospital, it's if you were in the hospital, who would visit you? And when I would ask people this question, it's who would you call? Many of them just said they would call Uber or Lyft to take them to the hospital. Maybe don't want the ambulance bill, but also does not want to bother a friend, does not want to be in imposition, even in a case that might be life and death. People were often too worried to impose on a friend or to impose on another person to ask for help. And I think that's telling. And the other thing is that I have a whole section in the book that's about asking for help and why it's really, really important to show that we are human, to show that we are vulnerable, to show like that we have weaknesses, to show that other people have something that they can contribute to our lives. And unfortunately, a lot of folks that I talk to have said that they are really plagued by this worry of not wanting to be a bother, not wanting to, again, like be an imposition or like put anybody out. And now, in this modern age that we have apps for everything, right? So it's like, why would you call a friend if you can call a Lyft? Why would you ask a friend for a restaurant recommendation if you can open Yelp? And I think this is a problem when we replace people with digital products for literally everything, because what we lose out on is the opportunity to actually have a meaningful conversation. I think about one of the last times I got to drive a friend to the airport or get picked up from the airport, and it was like a 40-minute hangout that was part of an errand. When I think about what my life looked like when I was in college or even my early 20s, a lot of my errands were actually merged with my friendship. So I was going to the grocery store, my friends were going to the grocery store. They were going to the laundromat, I was hopping in the car and going to the laundromat with them. They were going to the airport, somebody was going to give them a ride. And as we've gotten older, more of these things have become separated, and we don't, for some reason, think that they should go together or think that that's an appropriate place to invite connection. And I think that it actually would be really cool if we tried that and did more of that.
It's so funny that you're giving that example, because somebody had just wrote one of their favorite tips from your book was doing chores with friends and like
Yes.
laundry, and she loved that. So you've got some fans here. One of the questions, how do you balance intimate relationship and friendship? I know you wrote about this in your book, especially when your friends are the same gender as your partner.
So I am a huge, huge proponent of making sure that you have friend time, even if you're in a relationship. One of the reasons why partnership is one of like the main four, partnership and family is one of the main four like challenges for friendship. And I put challenges in quote because I'm not saying that it is a bad thing to want to have kids or to be in a romantic relationship. I'm not saying that. But Robin Dunbar, who's like the quintessential like social psychologist person who's like studied this, has said that when we have our intimate circle, which is our 5 closest friends or acquaintances or loved ones or whatever they might be, when somebody gets into a relationship, it typically leads to the loss of 2 friends from that circle. And that doesn't mean that it's because they had a fight or anything went wrong, but it's because it takes a lot of time to be, especially forming a new relationship. And because of that time and attention being like now funneled into one person, 2 people just kind of drift away. And so it takes awareness around that and to say, how am I going to be intentional about maintaining these connections if I know that my actual availability is about to shrink? Same thing happened when multiple friends of mine have had babies. I don't have kids. I have been on the like baby disappearance train for like a long time, where like my friends had kids and they were like gone in babyland for a while. And I just need to understand like that is a massive life change. It takes a lot of time to have an infant 24 hours a day that needs your attention. Some friends and I have found ways to like still be connected and merge that. And with other friends, they were like, oh my gosh, thank you for understanding that I just literally have no capacity right now. And it's like, girl, I'll see you in like a year. Just call me when you're free. It's okay. And I think we got to be flexible to some of these conditions that are real and they're really special.
I love that you have such a non-judgmental view, and that you're trying to understand such a variety of different experiences. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Um, Somebody asked, how do you know if an acquaintance would be open to making a friendship with you?
I would ask them.
And
I've
do
got
you have
this
examples in
crystal
English?
ball.
I know.
If only it was like we could just like read each other's minds and like perfectly know what everybody else wants. We don't, we can't. Sometimes you got to have a conversation. And again, I think that when we take the first step and be vulnerable first to share like what we're going for, what we're looking for, what we appreciate about them, like really make it not a demand, but more like an invitation. And also to say like, is this something that's okay? Do you want this? And to understand that the word no is an acceptable answer. One of the things I did, because I'm such a complete nerd, one year, as I was like doing all this writing and everything, I surveyed a bunch of my friends here in the Bay Area. Like it was like January, new year, new me. And I was like, I'm working on getting better friendships this year. And I emailed a group of people, it wasn't like a group of friends. They were people I knew individually. And I said, hey, I'm like really wanting to like work on my friendships this year. All of you are people that I love and trust, and I would love to be closer to you. Here are some of the ways that I'm going to make myself available this year. Like, I'm down for a spontaneous hangout on like a Tuesday, Thursday night. I'm down to go on walks. I'm down to cook dinner together. Like, I just listed like opportunities to connect. And I said, help me understand what feels like a good balance to you. And I had like a little like 3-question survey where I was like, do you feel like we hang out the right amount, not enough, or too much? Because like I literally would have to guess if I didn't ask that question. And some of my friends were like, haha. But I found out some of my friends wanted way more time with me. And some of my friends were like, I think we're good. We don't actually need more time. This is all I have time for. And I was like, cool. Now I know not to be frustrated if I'm like reaching out and that person's not available, and I know where to turn my attention. And it was like kind of funny, but it's also really useful to gather information rather than try to guess or assume.
Yeah, then you can like let go of that counsel in your head, telling yourself all the stories that may or may not be true, right?
Yeah.
So we have a question from one of our favorite people, Tiffany Rogers. Hi,
Hey, Tiffany.
there is often a friendship element in mentorship relationships. Do you think the same principles you outlined for friendships apply in terms of building connection and closeness?
In mentorship?
Mm-hmm.
What a cool question. I think there are similarities, certainly, because in a mentorship relationship, obviously both people are there for some kind of positive growth or enhancement, particularly of the mentee. Although often the people in the mentor role end up learning and growing just as much from learning from the mentee. The main difference that I would say between mentorship and friendship, though, is that it's really not expected to be reciprocal, because the mentor is there fully to enhance the life or experience or growth of the mentee. Whether they get anything back from it from the mentee, I think is like icing on the cake, but not to be expected. Kind of like a therapist, right? Like one of the analogies I make in the book is like the friendship is supposed to be reciprocal. If you just want someone to listen to you and you're not interested in hearing about them, maybe you need a therapist because they just listen and it's not reciprocal. You don't then turn around and listen to them for 45 minutes. So I think mentorship has some similarities to that, where like the goal is really to be generous and supportive to the mentee, fully around what their needs are. And so in that way, it's not a really reciprocal relationship. And so that would be the main difference. But aside from that, I think the same kind of like commitment, hopefully there's compatibility in that pairing, and that same kind of positive intention to the relationship.
And mutual respect, right?
And mutual respect, for sure.
I think that's so good. That's a great question. So somebody asked a question about how you build deeper friendships with really busy people. And one of my questions too was going to be to talk about the busyness syndrome, because I loved what you had to say about the busyness syndrome, because I too exited the word busy from my vocabulary because I got so sick of hearing from people like, how are you? Busy? Okay. Tell me about that. Tell me about the busyness syndrome.
Yeah, so I write about generalized busyness syndrome in the book because I think that our culture, unfortunately, has an addiction to busyness. And it's also prized in our society. And so there's like this incentive to always be busy or to always seem busy. And by doing so, we seem very like successful and must have like a lot of great things going on, must be in demand if you're busy. And so it's sort of like equated with your worth. And I think that's got some problems because unfortunately, if our lives are so completely packed and busy, that frequently means that we don't have time to do the things that are more nurturing and soul food, like soul nurturing. Often, like hanging out with a friend. You can be busy hanging out with a friend too. One of the analogies that I make in the book that has been really helpful to me and I try to remember is that the day only holds the same thing every single day, which is 24 hours of time, right? So if I spend 12 hours jet setting all over town, going to like 12 different events, running myself ragged, I have still only filled 12 hours. Or if I spent 12 hours sitting silent at a meditation retreat, I have still only filled 12 hours. And so it's more important not to think about like, oh, how much time do we have? You have the same amount of time. You have that 12 or 24 hours, but instead, what do you want to fill your life with? how do you want to spend that time? And what are the things that you hope to get on the other side of it? Like at the end of being super busy, maybe what you get is like being tired, and maybe you feel really accomplished about the things that you did and checked off your list. But if you want to cultivate your friendships and have stronger connections, you often have to do things that require putting a little pause button on busy and putting your attention and focus on things that sometimes require stillness.
That's well said. Thank you, Kat. Lots of great questions coming in. Someone said, how do you end a friendship that is no longer aligned with you? I have friends that continue to push time, but I'm not interested and I don't want to ghost them.
Good question. Good question. That is, that's real. That sometimes happens. So first, I want to acknowledge this person for saying that they don't want to ghost the other person, because that is so compassionate. And I think that there's sometimes okay things around ghosting, but if you've been friends for a while, like it's not so cool to just ghost on somebody. Particularly if it sounds like they keep reaching out, they're trying to push for time together. So obviously, like there's energy there. And I think this might be a time for a conversation. And there's a lot of ways that can go. Similar to before, it's kind of like, again, like that dating metaphor. Sometimes it's not you, it's me, we only have so much time and energy to cultivate friendships. And if you know that your heart is really not in it anymore, then I think it's a real gift to let that person know that they would be better suited to put their time and energy on someone else who's more emotionally available to them. And so one way that you can do this is really just to say, I've been reflecting on my relationships and I've realized that I'm trying to maintain too many of them, and I need to be more intentional with my time so that I give each person the attention they deserve. And I can see that I'm not going to be able to give you the attention that you really deserve from a friend. So I want to just explain why I'm not accepting a lot of the invitations that you send me. And I'd honestly feel a little bit less pressure if you maybe sent them to somebody else, because I just know I'm going to have to say no and I don't want to hurt your feelings. And so that way it's respectful to their time and they understand why you have pulled back. And it's not like they don't have to make up a story in their head about why you pulled back. Just be honest.
I'm so glad this is being recorded. I love your language. It's so thoughtful, and especially with that empathy of, I don't want to hurt your feelings, and I know I'm going to have to say no, right? I think it's really great. Monica Smith, I'm also going to ask you, I can't read all of the chat and also be in conversation because Kat has so many juicy nuggets here for me. So if there are questions that I'm not getting to, please feel free to jump right in and ask them. Okay.
There were a couple of questions early on about the situation, say that you're single, you don't have children, maybe you're retired. How do you go about meeting new friends?
Where you're single, you said retired, or you don't have children, with some idea that people in relationships or who are working or who have kids probably have other ways to meet people.
Correct.
Got it. So with that, one cool thing I've learned in this process is that there are communities out there for literally everything. Like there are friend groups on Meetup for people who are childless and don't ever want to have kids. Like they intentionally want to make friends with other people who have that same life goal. And so with that, I think that there's similarly as well, if you're looking to meet people who also are at the same life stage or who have made a big life decision like that, to then say, this is who I'm looking for, Google, help me out. And there is probably a group like this. The cool thing about being in pandemic is that everything's remote now. Like I can join a group that meets in New York or New Hampshire or wherever. And so a lot of opportunities are available to us virtually right now, just like this one we're having here tonight, because it doesn't require me to be living in, El Paso or Austin or Seattle. And so that's a really good opportunity right now to actually research something like that and see if you want to get to be a part of a group that may be remote, or if it's in your area. One other thing that I really try to remind people of is that it's often not for lack of people that we lack connection. Many of us are like around a lot of people. If you live in any kind of city or town or not like super rural area, there are, I actually crunched the numbers and put them in the book, but in a square mile, there's like anywhere between like 5,000 and 6,000 people living in any given city. And so there's probably more than 3 people within 1 mile of your house who are into the thing that you're into and are waiting for an invitation. Sometimes it means being really brave and putting it out there on like Nextdoor, which is an app that's like entirely geolocated to your neighborhood, or literally being brave and like putting it up in a like telephone pole or like coffee shop bulletin board when coffee shops are open again, things like that. Using your local weekly. I used to work for the local weekly. It was my first design job out of college. And it's like a really good way to connect with hyper local people who are into the same things that you're into. So be brave, make an invitation, see who's out there. And chances are there's somebody else nearby who wants to be friends too. One example of this, if I could share another story, I know this is kind of a long answer.
No, keep going.
But I want to share an example of this. So there's a woman that I interviewed for the book. She also came to a friendship workshop I did a year or two ago, and she was retired. Her kids were already grown up. They had moved away. They lived out of state, along with their grandkids, whatever. And she had a whole lot of extra grandma energy. She was like, I still got a lot to give. I'm a mom, I'm a grandma, but I don't have anywhere to put this love. And so she wrote a post on Nextdoor introducing herself. And she was like, hey, I'm so-and-so. I'm looking to make friends with a couple of other women who maybe have kids because, you know, my kids are all grown up and moved away. And I have a lot of grandma love to give. And I would love to have a young family to actually be friends with. And she got a lot of replies from women who either their moms lived far away, their moms had passed away, or they were estranged from their moms, just not close. And so she met up with a bunch of them, had coffee, found a couple that she actually clicked with. And through commitment at that point, and again, this like mutual clarity, like those women knew what she was looking for in a friend. And similarly, she could ask them. And she actually found a couple of really amazing chosen family members out of this. And now they're integrated to her life. And it's just this beautiful story of leading with vulnerability, making an invitation, and then saying yes.
That is a very inspiring story. And it's interesting because as you were telling that story, there's a whole conversation going on in the chat about age difference in friendship.
Yeah.
Any other comments on age difference that you would highlight?
I totally wish that our society was more adapted to like having intergenerational friendship and that it was seen as something that's like normal and possible. I think we sequester ourselves by age and life stage a lot. And you know, there's like benefits to that because like, hey, like we can relate, we're going through the same thing, but there's also a lot that gets lost when we don't have access to those other sources of information and inspiration that come from knowing people in different age groups. And I really love having intergenerational friendships too. So yay for all the people in the chat who are cheering for that as well.
Thanks. Well, and if you're looking for a new side hustle, Kat, there's somebody asking if you can make phone calls for them to friends. So there you go. We have a new side hustle for you. I love it. We've got a lively audience tonight. I'm having so much fun. Keep it going. It's great. Okay, I'm totally getting sidetracked, but that's okay. So much great questions. So one of the other stories I really loved in the book was when you discovered some Uber and or Lyft drivers who were driving for connection and friendship. Do you want to tell that story?
Yeah, this was really interesting because it was happening just really by happenstance where, you know, every now and then I would take a Lyft somewhere. I have a car, but I was going into the city a lot and like, I don't know if you're familiar with the Bay Area, but anyways, sometimes you just don't want to drive into the city because there's no parking. So I would like just chat up these Lyft drivers and be like, hey, so tell me about you, tell me what we're into. And we would end up talking about like why they started driving. And I met a couple of guys who described the fact that they chose to drive because they were lonely and because they wanted to have good conversations. And what was interesting is that, and these were guys who like had jobs as computer programmers and stuff, like they were not hungry for money, but they did it really because they did not have connection and they were not having the depth of conversations that they really wanted to have in life. And what's fascinating about being in a taxi, basically, is that people often feel free to open up and talk about stuff if they feel A, like semi-anonymous, and B, like there's an end to that conversation. You know that in like 14 minutes, you're going to be at your destination. So if you're like, oh, I'm crying about this thing or whatever, it's like, they're not going to judge you. You're probably never going to see them again. And so they would describe how people would really open up and be vulnerable to them. And they would have these like really open conversations because like, I'll never see you again. And so there's like this safety thing that comes with anonymity in a way. And there's also this experimentalness that comes with like knowing like we're only going to be talking for like 18 minutes. And also the fact that many people are looking for a good conversation and they're willing to take it wherever it comes, even if it just happens to be with someone who's like getting you from point A to point B. Yeah. So I thought that was really, really interesting. Of course, like right now, I'm not taking any lifts, pandemic, but I think this is really ingenious, the way that they were like, well, what's a way to talk to people for a few hours a day? I'm like, oh, I'll give them rides.
It is. It's and you know, I think it also highlights, you know, loneliness it's a real thing. And I think, you know, right now, especially during the pandemic, but I also think to some extent the digital world we live in and all the social media has contributed to that. You know, I'm as a parent, I see my kids in friendship in such different ways than the way I grew up. What are your thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, I am continually grateful, gosh, like every day, that I got to be an adult before the invention of social media. Like it just wasn't around when I was in high school or college. And I got to experience like part of adulthood before that stuff was invented. And I don't necessarily think that it's like blanket bad. And there's been a lot of research about like, oh, is this like causation or correlation, that there's like loneliness in social media? And it's always correlation. It's never quite causation. However, I'm opinionated. Right now, I'm sharing my opinion. This is not some scientific study. I am of the opinion that when we replace a face-to-face or a one-on-one or a voice-to-voice conversation with a super miniature version of interaction, which is like, I liked your post, I put a heart on it, and you can see that I put a heart on it. That is not the same depth of connection, nor is it as fulfilling as having a conversation, even for 5 minutes. And so for that reason, I have a lot of guidance, honestly, in the book about ways to use social media as a bridge to connection, not as a replacement for connection, and not using it as your only source of interacting with somebody that you say matters to you. So one of the things I used to do when I was using Facebook was I noticed that when I would make friends with somebody and then we would become friends on Facebook, we would stop talking in real life. And then we would just interact in the app, like, oh, I liked your post, I left a comment, whatever. And I did not like that. And so I made a rule for a number of years that if I met a new friend and I really liked them, I would not add them on social media. And I was like, here's my phone number. Let's hang out. Like, let's actually have a conversation. Let's get together. Let's do stuff. Because I could just see that over and over again, once I replaced this, like, wow, we met at a dinner party, having a great time, let's talk, with social, then we like never hung out again. And so people would think it was strange that I like would not add them on social. And it's like, that means I really like you. And that means I really want you in my life, because I really want to spend time with you off the platform. And so, you know, maybe that's extreme. Some people might think that's strange, but it really does add another layer of intentionality to say, what does it mean that we want to connect, and how do we want to connect? And are we going to make this social media platform our default place where our friendship lives, or does our friendship live in the real world?
I love that. Are we going to make this social media platform our default place for friendship, or does our friendship exist in the real world? That's really very poignant. Thank you for sharing. We are getting so many comments, and I'm going to do a quick time check. We have 15 minutes left, and I don't know that we'll get to all of the questions. I'm going to try and grab one, and then Monica, again, if you can help me, because I certainly don't want to miss some that were posted earlier. What are your thoughts about trying to convert an adversary into a friend, i.e. family? I knew we'd get to the juicy stuff.
That's a great question. I love the drama in that one. I'm thinking of like Snape. Anyways, so I love this one because, okay, so I don't know about i.e. family. I'm going to answer the first part of it and I'll go to the next one. So the first part, converting an adversary into a friend. One of the really cool things I have experienced in my life, and I noticed this over time, and now it kind of like tickles me, is like sometimes when I meet someone and like right off the bat, I don't like them, I often become friends with them later. And I've noticed this happen a couple times in my life. And it's usually just because like we're really different. So there's something like sandpaper there. Like maybe it's opposites attract or something. But I've had this a couple times in my life where like I met a woman, I was like, oh yeah, she's kind of like abrasive, or like, I don't know if I like her. And then later on, we were like super tight. And I think that there's something really special with that. And the thing that I realized as I noticed it, I was like, what is happening here? What I tried to do was to notice like, what is different about me and them? What is the thing that feels contrasting, or even like that sandpaper? And like, what is the gift that she brings that is so different from me? So I'm thinking of one woman in particular who, when I met her, I did think she was kind of abrasive, you know, and she was like really brash, and she just like said stuff like kind of harsh. And I was just like, man, like, what is it about that? But I was like, she's taken no crap. Like, I really admire that. You know, she's calling it like it is. And she's not worried about what other people think of her. And I actually really admire that. And so in time, I think there's something really useful. And so whenever I feel like that, I just get kind of curious, and I'm like, interesting. What is it that I can see about this person that I actually admire, or that I think I can learn from? And it's been really cool to make friends with some people that at the beginning felt like an adversary, or someone I was like, oh, get some space. And as far as family, that's a whole nother bucket of worms. Sometimes you're stuck with a family, you got to figure out how to deal with them. But if you want to convert them into a friend, I would say treat them just like you would treat a friend. Like, if you really want to be more connected to them, do the same things you would do if you wanted to be connected to a friend. Show curiosity, invite them to things, listen to them really well, ask for their thoughts and feelings, and give them the same generous interest that you might show in any other friend that you would want to make.
It sounds like courage is a common theme, because that would definitely take courage. I know for me it would. But there was a question that came up earlier that was, any advice for people who have difficulty being courageous enough to initiate getting closer to an acquaintance? So what are some baby steps?
Yeah. So one good exercise you could do is like get a sheet of paper and like make a couple of columns. And in the first column, write like, what do I feel comfortable doing right now? And the answer might be nothing. The answer might be like waiting and seeing if they call me. And then like in the next column, say like, what would you do if you were 25% more brave? And then the next column, what would you do if you were 50% more brave? And then the last one, you could do like 75 or 100% more brave. And the answer is not to say like, oh God, now I got to freak myself out and go to that last column right away. But instead, like take it in steps, like take it in stages, and see like, maybe one day you wake up and you're feeling 25% more brave than you were 3 weeks ago. And maybe that's the day that you do something new, like invite them to take that watercolor class with you, you know, or maybe you invite them to do a phone call while you both like fold your laundry or go on a walk. And so from there, say, well, once you've reached that level, what does 25% more brave look like from there? So that you take it again in stages and kind of build that confidence as you scaffold up, rather than being like, oh gosh, I got to jump in the deep end. You don't have to do that.
Thank you. There was also a question that came up about the assumption with parents with young children that they're just too busy. And I know that my daughter-in-law has the same issue. So the assumption is there that, oh no, they don't have time for me, I'm not going to approach them. But then the mom needs it so much. How do you overcome that perception?
Yeah. And that I think is where it's really important to have a conversation to see like, is this person actually too busy? Or maybe they're actually lonely and they wish their friends would reach out to them, and to understand like, how much availability do you each have, and how much desire do you both have for friendship? So I gave the example earlier of having a friend who felt completely overwhelmed as a new mom. And she was like very clear with me. She was like, thank you for understanding that I literally have no time for extra connections right now outside of my family. And I was like, it's fine. And I also had another dear friend of mine. And when she was going to have her first baby, I went through like the stages of grief, because I was like, I think I'm going to lose my friend. Like, this keeps happening. People have kids, and then a lot of them like are distant now. And I was like really sad. And we had a heart to heart about it. I said, I love you. And I am so scared that our friendship is going to diminish or disintegrate, because like, we're just going to have to make room for it. And she was like, no way. Like, this kid is coming along for the ride. Like, they'll be in my backpack. Like, we are still hanging out. Like, we are still going to be friends. And so by having this real open heart to heart around what we both wanted for our friendship, pre-baby and post-baby, like, we've been able to maintain that friendship and to have like connection and check-ins about like, how are we doing? I miss you. Like, how can we talk more? And so it's been like so mind-blowing to realize that it's actually, yes, possible if that mutual dedication is there. And the only way to know is to have a conversation. It really is.
And I think, what you're saying, Kat, makes so much sense, because when you think about all the anxiety and energy of not knowing because you're not having conversation, is that more or less difficult than the anxiety of just having the conversation, right?
Yeah.
And if you approach it in a way that is non-threatening, that is with empathy, that is with, as you said many times, leading with vulnerability, really your outcome in those experiences have been positive. And to kind of let go of perfection and let go of the outcome, right? And just focus on the ask, right?
Yeah.
That little baby step you can take.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I also want to acknowledge one person in the chat who mentioned that they asked for standing calls. This is so genius, and I highly recommend doing things that don't require individual scheduling for every conversation. Make it a repeating calendar event. Even if you got to bump it every now and then, make an agreement that like it's standing, whether it's weekly, monthly, bi-weekly, whatever. That's like, this is when we check in. We don't have to question it. If you adjust it, fine, but make it a norm so that it's just going to happen automatically.
And somebody else wrote that they have sent so many cards in 2020, which I think sending cards is great. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes, heck yes. So I started a group called Connection Club. I think who's here from Connection Club? I saw a couple people mention that at the beginning. I think Kari's here. There's someone else who's here from Tiffany. Yes, there's a few folks here from Connection Club. So Connection Club is a group I started last summer during the pandemic because I really love snail mail, and I've been a pen paler for many years. And during the pandemic, I realized I was like getting Zoom fatigue, and I was like, I'm not going to just let my friendships like fade away because I'm like not willing to do everything on video call. I don't even really want to do everything on video call. And so I thought a lot of other people might feel the same way and might want some loving accountability for staying in touch with their friends as a ritual, as a habit, through the practice of writing letters and cards, and sometimes making art even and sending it to people. And so, Connection Club. Hey, Wendy, what's up, Tasha? There's like people who are here in the group and who have joined the community to say like, we're going to get together. I host it on Monday evenings and Thursday afternoons. And we sit and we spend half an hour. I DJ some great music. We spend half an hour writing together. And then for folks who want to stay on and meet new people, there's also the opportunity to go into guided small group conversations in pairs to meet other people in the community who obviously value friendship, or they would not be in Connection Club. So it's a really, really amazing community of folks who do this ritual together. We've had a lot of great fun. It's really been a bright spot out of the last year of pandemic as well. And I also have another event coming up called Here to Make Friends. I can put the link in the chat for people who literally want to go to an event and hopefully leave with a new friend. So.
Yeah, I would love for you to put that in the chat, because you're reading my mind, which is I want to phase this to the end. You've shared so much genius, as always, just so openly, always sharing everything you've learned. And that's one of the things I really value and respect about you, Kat. So as people are going to want more of you after tonight, I can just tell. So one easy way that I can say is order the book. Monica Smith from Rebel 11 was saying tonight that she bought several to give to friends as gifts. You could even highlight or tab and say to a friend like, hey, what do you think of this idea, right? That's one fun way to do it. How else can they connect with you, learn more, stay in touch?
Yeah, so I'll drop my links in the chat for folks who want to stay in touch, connect with me, whether it's coming to a future event, checking out, like I do a weekly newsletter as well that has tips and guidance for, making better friendships, being a better friend to yourself, building better community, all that good stuff. If you nerd out about that kind of thing and you want to know what's in my head, like subscribe to the newsletter. Also, Here to Make Friends is happening on April 15th. So pay your taxes and come make a new friend. It'll take the burn off your taxes. It'll make you feel better. So that's coming up on April 15th. The link is there. Use promo code REVEL for 10% off. Connection Club, as I mentioned, is at my website, weshouldgettogether.com. I would love to see all of you there. And I know I did not have time to answer all your questions. I frequently do take extra questions from things like this and answer them in my newsletter. So if you signed up for that, I might answer your question later on. But also there'll be time for upcoming events and things like that if you want to come chat and learn more. So do it, reach out to your people, like make it a habit, make it a ritual. It does not happen magically on its own. You got to show up and put in that effort, put in that attention. So yeah, that's what I'm all about.
So grateful for you and your work. Very, just again, innovative, refreshing, fun. You have a way of covering really important topics in a way that's just so digestible and relatable. And I really appreciate you, Kat. Thank you. Such a pleasure.
Thank you.
I'm going to spend just a minute